In print, on air and on the web. This is International Correspondence on CNN. Hello, I'm Fionnuala Sweeney, and coming up, a crackdown on protesters, an all-out assault on the media. Iran's campaign to suppress dissent intensifies. Our social media sites, which allow so many journalists to operate in the country, are now being used against them. And a triumph for citizen journalism. An anonymous bystander who captured the dying moments of an Iranian protester wins a top media award. But we begin with the situation facing journalists right now. This month, the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists released a report, Attacks on the Press 2009. According to the report, Iran saw, quote, one of the most vicious and widespread crackdowns on the press in recent memory. The CPJ says more than 90 journalists were rounded up to suppress dissent in the aftermath of the June elections. Reports say some have been tortured. We're joined now by Maziar Bahairi in Phoenix, Arizona, correspondent for Newsweek, who was himself jailed in Iran and who recently wrote an open letter to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, urging the release of fellow journalists. And in London, we're joined by Iranian journalist Baqer Moin. First of all, Baqer, if we could put into historical context what is taking place in Iran today, is there any precedence?
Absolutely. If we look at the 100 years in the Iranian history, we see 2 revolutions and 3 coups d'etats. In those periods, you've had the same kind of actors in the Iranian media scene. You've had a government who've been trying to control the media. You've had owners and operators who didn't know what to do because there was no clear law. You had the journalists who had no guidance, law or social contract in which the red lines are clear for them to be creative. You had the opposition who felt free to inject ideas and emotions from abroad. And also you had some kind of international media from 1940 onwards. Both elements, i.e. the presence of journalists and opposition inside the country and outside, as well as the way the newspapers and media were operating, are very similar, with the exception that today we've got the social networking and the internet.
So many, if not all of those elements are in place now, but what can we tell from the past that might lead us to project what might happen within Iran in the coming months and years even?
When the governments tried to control the media, people lost their trust in the media. And when they lose their trust in the media, people look for other sources, for gossip, for night letters that were written in the past, for books that were coming to the country from outside, like Ayatollah Khamenei himself sent all his messages during the Shah in cassette tapes or in little books the same size as cigarette packets. So it has been going on. So the governments really cannot control. For the first time, we've got citizen journalism and grassroots reporting.
Maziar Bahairi, you obviously experienced firsthand the wrath of the Iranian authorities in prison. In this open letter, you said that to the Supreme Leader it would be good for him, good for Iran, that your fellow journalists be released. I mean, realistically, how could you expect that to be the case?
Well, the argument I'm making in my opinion piece is that the journalists traditionally in Iran have been acting as a safety valve for the society. So whenever the society came to a point of explosion, to the boiling point, the journalists, the intellectuals who reflected the opinion of the people in newspapers and magazines, they acted as a safety valve, and the situation was calmer. And I can give you different examples throughout Iranian history that something like that happened. What I suggested to Mr. Khamenei was that what he did in terms of the crackdown on the media is not only illegal, but also it's counterproductive in terms of the survival of the regime.
Let me ask you then the role of the media because in Iran, because it is said that there are many Iranian journalists who don't exactly want regime change. Might that have changed over the last few months? And you really do believe that they can act as a safety valve in some ways in the interests of the authorities?
They are. Most of the journalists that I know, actually all of the journalists I know, they are not asking for a regime change. They are asking for a reform within the framework of the Islamic Republic government. And for the Islamic government, arresting those journalists, it is shooting itself in the foot. And I think that the Islamic government this is a typical dictatorial, the phenomenon that the power blinds and they lose sight of their strategic gains and they only think about their tactical gains.
Just to add to what Maziar said, the problem with the Iranian journalists is that really in the absence of an active opposition and political parties in the country, the journalists are kind of taking upon themselves to act like the opposition. And that creates a problem. The problem is not so much in what they do. The problem is that we don't have a proper legally defined environment for the journalists. What are the red lines? How much the journalists can be creative? What are the social contract between the two sides? What are the role of the religious ideas? How much a journalist can go? This is a basic problem that has been in Iran for the journalists. But unfortunately, as Maziar said, because now we've got a lot of people, young people, active in sending reports to the international media, the verification system is not as used to be. So when the government jails experienced journalists, the result is that inexperienced people come to the fore, and always you cannot really verify what comes out. And at the end of the day, I think the government suffers for it.
I want to turn now to something from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and a quote from Robert Mahoney there saying that essentially they're very concerned about what is taking place for journalists in Iran, saying, quote, "The Iranian government is now using Facebook to go after and find dissidents and journalists, mining their data, seeing who their friends are. They're turning the technology that should liberate the press against the press, and this is a worrying trend." Maziar Bahairi, can you summarise for us what you believe the situation to be, generally speaking, for journalists in Iran at the moment?
Well, I learned that within the first 10 minutes of my arrest, that after a few minutes, they asked me for my Facebook password, my email, different emails, passwords, and they went through all the contacts I had on my mobile phone. There is no law regarding privacy in Iran, and whatever law there is, the government ignores it as well. And the government is just trying to shut down whatever information is available to people in order to survive for the moment.
Essentially here, both sides are using social media, and we've all heard of the Iran cyber army, which has tried to sabotage Twitter and other areas. But the question is, if you draw a parallel with Myanmar and what happened there 18 months ago over the monks' protest, can a government stop the growth of social media and what is taking place on it on the part of the Iranian citizens? They're always put in a reactive situation, are they not, Moin?
Absolutely. I think, as we know, there are some 23 million people in Iran who have got access to the internet one way or another. It may be limited, nevertheless is there, and I think they are going to send their messages across. And the Iranian government is in a very, very reactive mood at the moment. They think they'll be able to stop the news spreading around, but they would not be, because it hasn't been really. And my feeling is at the moment we are just like during the Cold War. They're permanently in a sort of reactive gear, spending a lot of money, energy and budget to stop news coming through, while if they broadcast exactly the same news, people would not be listening to external media, radio, television and so forth. Very briefly and finally,
Maziar Bahairi, a quick question. The fate of journalism in Iran in 2010 as opposed to a pretty gloomy year in 2009.
I think in 2010, I think we're going to see a worse situation than 2009. And in 2011, we may see a worse situation as well. This is a government that's on the wrong side of the history, and it's trying to turn back the tide of time. Okay. And it's going to be defeated eventually. But in the next short while, we'll see the worsening situation in Iran, and especially for journalism in Iran.
Maziar Bahairi in Phoenix, Arizona, thank you for joining us. Also here in the studio, Moin. An anonymous video wins a top media prize. Can citizen journalism help determine the future of Iran? We talk to a celebrated Iranian filmmaker next.